There's a moment in your healing where you feel the shift. The ache doesn't sting like it used to. The silence no longer feels cruel. It feels clean. And just as you're learning to breathe again, there it is. A message, a like, a casual reaction, a shadow of what used to be, drifting back into your world like it never left. It's not an apology. It's not accountability. It's not a real attempt to re-enter with clarity. It's just a whisper. The whisper of someone who once held your heart, and now, after realizing what they carelessly misplaced, is testing the waters. Not with courage, not with purpose, but with hesitation, calculation, and half-hearted reach. That whisper is not love. That whisper is a question. Am I still welcome in the places I walked away from? And this is the moment, not when they return with conviction, but when they return with curiosity. This is the moment that defines whether you reclaim your power or slip back into a version of yourself that waited in quiet desperation for a knock at a door you never should have left open. When someone truly realizes your value, they don't whisper, they don't breadcrumb. They don't send a casual, "How are you?" into the void, expecting an open invitation to the emotional palace they once took for granted. When they truly understand what was lost, they arrive, whole, humble, honest. But what often comes first, before clarity, before true regret, is the test. It looks innocent, almost sweet, a meme, a memory, a passive just checking in. It might even trigger a rush inside you, that old craving to feel seen, remembered, relevant again in someone else's world. But that's not love. That's a radar sweep. That's someone trying to confirm whether your door is still unlocked. Not because they want to come in, but because they want to know they still could. And here's the hard truth most avoid. Silence isn't broken by someone who wants to build. It's often broken by someone who wants to borrow. Borrow comfort, borrow reassurance, borrow emotional security. But they're not bringing tools. They're not here to repair what was broken. They're here to measure what still remains. The moment you receive a subtle check-in, the moment your phone lights up with a name your heart once broke over, you must pause. Not because you're bitter, not because you want revenge, but because you now operate from wisdom, from clarity, from the hard-earned understanding that access to your heart is no longer free. It requires presence, purpose, and proof. Letting someone re-enter your world because they miss you isn't love, it's emotional nostalgia. It's an attempt to soothe their ache, not a commitment to honor yours. And nostalgia is seductive. It wears the perfume of good memories while hiding the scars of what actually happened. It plays old songs, shows old pictures, reminds you of how good it once felt, without ever reminding you of how it ended. So when a subtle message arrives, don't reply immediately. Don't perform. Don't analyze. Don't contort yourself into the most palatable version of who you think they want you to be. Instead, observe. Not them, but yourself. What do you feel? Excitement, validation, fear, hope. Observe the part of you that's still trying to interpret a vague signal as a sign of growth. That's where your healing lives, not in what they sent, but in what you still want it to mean. It's easy to get swept into the rhythm of connection again. Easy to read too much into too little. But growth demands stillness, and stillness gives you space to see clearly. Clarity reveals truth, and the truth is this: someone who wants to be in your life won't test the waters, they'll dive in. Someone who values you doesn't peek through the window. They knock, they wait, they show up again and again, not because they want something from you, but because they want to be with you. Until then, you owe yourself protection, not from them, from your own impulse to mistake a ripple for a wave, a breadcrumb for a feast, a message for a mission. This isn't about closing your heart. It's about refining your filter. It's about asking the harder question. Does this message carry weight? Or is it a recycled pattern dressed up as progress? When you respond too quickly, you train others that your value resets with every message. When you let ambiguity back in, you shrink the space you've carved out for peace. When you interpret subtlety as sincerity, you start performing again. But you're not here to audition. You've already earned your worth. Now you must enforce it. There's nothing wrong with someone wanting to reconnect. People evolve, people regret, people make mistakes and seek redemption. But redemption doesn't come through subtlety. It comes through substance. If someone truly misses you, they don't test. They take a step forward with vulnerability, with clarity, with effort. Not a hey, not a just thought of you, but a wholehearted gesture. Until that arrives, you stay in your center. You don't adjust your energy for fragments. You don't rearrange your heart for ghosts. You don't press pause on your evolution because someone remembered your name in the middle of their loneliness. You rise because you know what's behind that message. You know it's not pure. You know it's not complete. You know it's not real intention. Not yet. And if you respond too soon, too kindly, too openly, you become predictable. Predictability is not the same as emotional safety. It becomes emotional convenience. You weren't put on this earth to be emotionally convenient. You weren't designed to be someone's momentary relief from their own confusion. You're here to be chosen, not when it's easy, not when they're bored, but when they're ready to show up. So you let the check-in come. You let the message arrive. You let the silence be broken, not because it changes you, but because it confirms you. It confirms who still thinks access is a game. It confirms who still moves with half intention. It confirms who still values comfort over courage. And most importantly, it confirms how much you've grown. Growth isn't always glamorous. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to reply. Sometimes it's the heartbreak of silence over the high of false hope. And the resilience it takes to refuse to reply. Sometimes it's the heartbreak of silence over the high of false hope. But each time you honor your standards, even in the face of old emotions, you rebuild your foundation. Stronger, cleaner, more sacred. You're not hard to reach. You're hard to impress. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not punishing anyone. You're protecting your peace. That message may stir old feelings, but it doesn't own your response. You do. You have nothing to prove, no chase to initiate, no softness to perform on demand. You are allowed to wait for substance. You are allowed to desire presence. You are allowed to say, this isn't enough, not anymore. And when they come back, if they ever do, they'll know the difference between access and entrance, between nostalgia and devotion, between casual and committed, because you trained them, not by what you said, but by what you no longer accepted. You don't need to declare your standards. You live them. You don't need to explain your silence. It speaks with power. You don't need to decode a message. It decoded them. And in that decoding, you finally see what all of this has taught you. Your time, your heart, your presence, they're not up for negotiation. So the next time you get a subtle check-in, don't get pulled into the past, get anchored in your present. Remember what you've healed from. Remember what it cost you to arrive here. And then ask yourself the question that saves everything. Is this the return of someone who's grown, or just the echo of someone who hasn't? Because whispers don't rebuild broken bridges. Subtle doesn't hold weight. And missing someone is not the same as being ready for them. Let them test the waters if they must. You don't owe them a lifeline. Not when you've already learned how to swim without one. It always looks different from the outside. You see the photos, the stories, the laughter, the movement, the seemingly uninterrupted rhythm of someone's life continuing without you. And it cuts deeper than you'd care to admit. Because you wonder, how can someone look so alive in a world where you no longer exist? But what you must understand is this: the loudest distractions are often hiding the deepest hollowness. The more desperately someone chases external validation, the more they reveal just how little internal peace they actually have. They may smile, but it's a smile crafted for public consumption, not personal fulfillment. It's curated, it's designed, it's a mask, not a mirror. When someone walks away, especially when it's casual, abrupt, or unexplained, there is a tension that brews in their absence. At first, they feel free, unburdened. They breathe the air of detachment like it's oxygen after suffocation. They may convince themselves they've made the right decision. They may even chase that feeling by leaning into distraction with people, with parties, with performance. But distraction isn't healing. It's anesthesia. And anesthesia always wears off. The pursuit of validation becomes the main act. They post more, party more, connect more. But it's not depth they're after. It's reaction. Because every like, every compliment, every flirtation is an attempt to drown the silence that follows a meaningful loss. The silence that asks difficult questions. What did I walk away from? What did I devalue? What connection did I abandon for the illusion of ease? But those questions don't surface immediately. The questions that light up, first comes the high. And in that high, they collect the moments that make it look like they've moved on. And you, watching from afar, might mistake their noise for confidence, their busyness for peace. You might even begin to question your worth, wondering why your absence feels invisible, why your presence seems to be so easily replaced. But here's the truth. Real connection doesn't vanish. It lingers. It echoes. It leaves fingerprints on the soul. And the harder someone tries to replace that echo with artificial sound, the louder their emptiness becomes. They aren't moving on. They're running away, not from you, but from the emotional reckoning that comes from losing someone they once had access to, but didn't value enough to hold. External validation is seductive. It promises quick reassurance. It makes you feel important, briefly, but it fades fast, because no amount of attention from strangers can compensate for the absence of authenticity. No amount of new faces can erase the memory of the one who saw you deeply. No party, no praise, no performance can ever satisfy the soul that once felt seen, understood, cherished, and then chose noise over depth. Eventually, distraction becomes exhausting. The high flattens. The novelty wears off. And all that's left is the hollowness they tried to outrun. That's when the realization hits. Not in the middle of the party, but in the quiet that follows. When the phone goes silent. When the dopamine drops. When the compliments lose their sparkle because they're based on a version of self that's being projected, not a self that's truly being known. And I try to align, and that moment, that's the pivot point. That's when they begin to miss not just the connection, but the peace that connection brought. Because peace doesn't come from being seen by many, it comes from being known by one. It doesn't come from attention, it comes from alignment. And when that alignment is gone, the soul begins to ache in a way that can't be numbed by noise. Now, here's what's important. Your power lies in understanding this without needing to witness it. You do not need their realization to validate your worth. You do not need their regret to reinforce your value. Because the moment you begin measuring your healing against someone else's delay, you hand over your growth to someone else's timeline. It is not your responsibility to wait for the hollowness to catch up to someone who chose distraction. It is not your role to be the landing place for someone who only understands your worth after the echo sets in. You are not a test drive they return to once the road gets bumpy. You are not a memory they visit when reality disappoints them. You are a sanctuary, and sanctuaries do not stay open for tourists. Let them run. Let them dance in the glow of fleeting attention. Let them bask in the illusion that they are okay, because all that chasing, all that validating, all that distracting, it's a temporary shield from the truth they will eventually face, that they had something rare and now they don't. But your energy must not orbit their awakening. You must not become the silent observer of their descent, hoping that one day they'll look around and realize you are the peace they're now starving for. That's not healing. That's still performing. You are not built to be someone's consequence. You were built to be your own beginning. So you continue, not with bitterness, but with clarity. You don't compete with the noise. You don't try to be seen again. You don't lower your worth to match their frequency. You rise, quietly, consistently, boldly. You don't watch the stories. You don't decode the captions. You don't trace the timeline of their performance to guess when the hollowness might set in, because their journey is no longer yours. You are no longer the audience to someone else's delay in emotional maturity. You rebuild your center. You restore your energy. You rise into the life that doesn't require someone to come back for you to feel whole again. And when you do, when you truly anchor into that, a shift occurs. You begin to lose interest in the echo. You no longer crave proof that they miss you. You no longer hope for their apology, because you've created a world so rich, so real, so rooted in authenticity that even if they returned with every word you once longed to hear, you'd realize you've outgrown the need for it. The truth is, the longer someone tries to substitute validation for value, the more they forget what real connection feels like. And by the time they remember, the version of you they once had access to has evolved into someone far more discerning, far more self-assured, far more unavailable to those who only know how to show up once the spotlight dims. You didn't lose. You weren't forgotten. You weren't replaced. You were remembered too late. And that's not a tragedy. That's a revelation. Because anyone who must drown in validation to realize your worth was never ready to hold it in the first place. So breathe, rise, reclaim your narrative, not because they will one day feel hollow, but because you no longer feel the need to fill anyone else's void. You've learned to fill your own. And that, more than anything, is the definition of freedom. Memory is not neutral. It doesn't arrive as it happened. It returns as it's needed. And when someone begins to feel the quiet tug of something lost, they don't remember you as you are now. They remember you as they last held you, as you were when you still offered access, when you still softened at their inconsistencies, when you waited, when you hoped, when you made excuses on their behalf and still tried to love anyway. They don't remember your power. They remember your permission. They don't see your growth. they're stuck on your availability. It's not who you are now that they miss. It's the version of you they once took for granted, the one who hadn't yet walked away, the one who hadn't yet learned the difference between proving your worth and embodying it. And so, when the silence grows loud enough, when the distractions no longer satisfy, when the echo begins to ache, that's when the replay begins. So, when the replay begins, not with facts, but with feelings. They don't remember the conversations where you asked for more. They remember the comfort you still gave when they gave you less. They don't remember the moment they made you feel small. They remember the way you still stayed, even when you felt unseen. You'll romanticize your softness, your loyalty, your patience. But they forget the price you paid for giving so much. They forget the nights you doubted yourself, the days you smiled while hurting, the times you justified the silence. Because their memory is stitched from the fabric of what served them, not what saved you. And this is where your strength is tested, not when they forget you, but when they remember you wrong. When they begin to reach again, not for the evolved you, but for the outdated version they believe still lives beneath the surface. The version who waited, the version who would still answer, still break her own boundaries just to be chosen. They will come back, not because they're ready to match your value, but because they miss the feeling of being granted access to something sacred without having to earn it. And that is the moment your growth must speak louder than your loneliness. Because it's tempting, isn't it, to be remembered, to feel wanted, to be seen, even if it's through the wrong lens. It's tempting to step back into that role, to wear the costume of who you used to be, just to feel close to something that once mattered. But that's not closeness. That's regression. That's the betrayal of all the healing you fought for just to make someone else comfortable in the presence of your progress. You must not shrink to be recognized. You must not rewind just because someone hit replay, because every time you re-enter someone's life as the version they're nostalgic for, you abandon the version you've become. The one who no longer tolerates breadcrumbs, the one who has rewritten her story without needing permission, the one who no longer sits quietly in a room where she's forgotten. The past version of you was not weak, she was necessary. She was the bridge between your unawareness and your awakening. She loved hard, not because she lacked worth, but because she hadn't yet realized it wasn't hers to prove. That version of you wasn't foolish. She was hopeful, brave, willing to offer everything in the name of something meaningful. But now you see clearly, offering yourself doesn't mean erasing yourself. So when someone begins to look back, when they start to remember the you they once took for granted, let them. Let them replay the softness. Let them relive the warmth. Let them ache for the patience. But don't go back to deliver it. Let the only access they have be through memory. Let the distance remain intact, not out of punishment, but out of purpose. You've changed. Quietly, radically, deeply. You no longer explain your standards, you enforce them. You no longer beg to be seen, you walk where you're celebrated. You no longer hope someone will choose you because you've already chosen yourself. When someone begins to miss the past version of you, they're not missing you, they're missing the control, the convenience, the certainty. They're missing the version of you that made it easy for them to show up halfway and still feel whole. And when that version no longer responds, they're forced to confront the mirror they've avoided, the one that reveals their choices, their avoidance, their lack of presence. And here's what makes it even harder. They may not even realize they're doing it. They may reach out with kindness, with nostalgia, with the illusion of maturity. They may speak of missing what you had, but the words are vague, the gestures are passive, the reach is emotional, but the effort is absent. Because they're not reaching for your reality, they're reaching for a memory. You must discern the difference between someone who wants to honor your current self and someone who simply misses the emotional comfort your past self provided. Because if you entertain nostalgia without discernment, you become a mirror for someone else's denial, a character in their emotional time machine. But you are not here to help someone remember who you were. You are here to embody who you are. And that woman, she doesn't bend at the sound of a familiar name. She doesn't confuse contact with commitment. She doesn't mistake longing for love. She has too much self-respect to become someone's emotional museum, a place they visit to remember how good it used to feel. Let them wonder, let them question if that version still exists. Let them ask themselves, would she still respond the same way? And let the answer echo in the silence of your absence. Let the growth you've achieved speak in the language of boundaries, distance, and unwavering self-worth. Because you're not here to be haunted. You're not here to be remembered in pieces. You're here to be chosen in wholeness. And the only people who deserve access to your life now are the ones who can meet the present version of you without needing her to shrink into the shadow of who she used to be. This is your becoming, the space between who you were and who you're rising into. And no one gets to drag you backward just because they finally opened their eyes. You did not evolve for closure. You evolve for yourself. Not to prove a point, not to inspire regret, but because your future demanded it, because your peace required it, because your heart deserved it. So you walk forward even when memory calls your name, even when the past tries to lure you with soft words and selective remembering. You keep walking, because forward is where your life is. Forward is where your healing lives. Forward is where someone, someday, will see you not as a memory, not as a projection, but as a whole, worthy, extraordinary human being, exactly as you are now. You've done the work. You've sat with the ache. You've chosen growth over comfort. You've grieved the illusion. You've reparented your worth. You've stopped asking why. And now you're here, standing in the life you built with trembling hands and quiet courage. So know that version of you no longer exists. The one they replay in their mind, she's gone. She grew. She healed. She buried her old self so her new self could rise. And what stands in her place now is someone who doesn't fear being missed, because she no longer misses herself.